I have dreams of doing a lot more in this life. The only problem is, I'm working a job flipping burgers, and all I want to do is play video games all day. I don't see myself ever doing anything more than this life. Not so fast. Who are you? It is me, Nick Davis. And I'm here to let you know that anyone, including you, can reinvent themselves regardless of their current circumstances. And it's a lot more doable than you probably think. All you need is a little guidance, maybe a little direction, and of course, watch the rest of this video and leave a like down below as a sacrifice to the YouTube channel. What's going on, you guys? My name is Nick. If you're new here, I'm currently a full-time Army officer. I'm also a former pipeline mechanical engineer, former project manager, former restaurant server. I used to be a lawn maintenance specialist, a car washer, and I used to flip burgers. Now, that was just a down and dirty outline of some of the jobs I've had over the years. And the key takeaway from that isn't to show you that I can't hold down a job, but to reflect on how each major change I made in my job or career helped to build me into a better person. The things that I've experienced over the years, it's filled my brain with all kinds of ideas on how to reinvent yourself. And today, I'm going to discuss my 8-step process to reinvention. And before we dive into this, full transparency, I am not going to sit here and pretend like I knew what I was doing most of the time. At the time, it didn't feel like I was performing these jobs in an effort to forge myself into something stronger. No, like most of you, what I was feeling was, well, this job is a dead end, or, well, no matter how hard I work, my boss won't give me a shot because I'm not in the clique. Now, I fully acknowledge that many of you are either just starting your lives fresh out of college, or maybe you're on the other end of the spectrum. There are plenty of you out there with stable careers who are feeling unfulfilled and feeling stagnant. Now, I've been on both sides of the fence, and it sucks either way. Now, in both situations, I could have just stayed put and accepted the reality for what it was. After all, who am I to feel like I'm special enough to deserve more out of life? Nick Davis. Well, unfortunately, that's where you're wrong. Because the thing is, it doesn't matter whether I believe I'm special or not. Having a solid system for achieving my goals, no matter how big or small they may be, has helped me to focus on the process and block out that negativity that surrounds me daily. So anyway, let's dive into these 8 steps. Step number 1, find rock bottom and embrace the suck. Now, I like to think of myself as one of the smartest dumb people you will ever meet. I don't know why my brain is wired the way it is, but it's amazing the things I remember and the things that I just can't. If you ever ran into me and asked me how old I am, well, I have to do the mental math every single time. I just don't find that number to be particularly important, so I just dump that information. Now, on the other hand, something I remember vividly is one of my first real encounters with learning to embrace the suck. I just finished my time at Army Basic Training, and I was just a few weeks into Officer Candidate School, OCS, at Fort Benning, Georgia. Now, for those of you who don't know, Fort Benning OCS is a 12-week course comprised of intense classroom instruction, field training, and physical exercise. Now, you have to keep in mind, I was fresh out of basic training at this point, which meant I had about 2 months of Army service time under my belt before I had attended OCS, which is actually a little unusual. To say I struggled with OCS is an understatement. Now, that's a story for another day, but one of the most stressful events for that course for me was land navigation. Now, we had touched on land navigation a little in basic training, but nothing to the extent we were required to do to pass OCS. Now, this land nav course was massive. If memory serves correct, that first point was over 2,000 clicks away. It was cold and dark in the morning. Everything was muddy with red Georgia clay from the night prior, and the rain just would not let up. I tried everything I could to keep my boots dry. Even my rain jacket was letting water roll down my neck. I was so concerned with finding my first point, I spent over 2 hours looking for it before I gave up, and I missed the time hack as a result and failed the first day. I think I was one of 6 people to fail out of a class of 100, and that was a serious blow to my gut. However, something interesting happened on the next day. While looking for that first point again, I began to panic. All the negative thoughts ran through my head. Those thoughts about how I was going to fail this course, thoughts about how wet and cold I was, and thoughts about how I just couldn't do this anymore. Then, for whatever reason, the thoughts just stopped. Now, maybe I was just too numb from the cold to care anymore, or possibly it was when I said screw it and jumped into a flooded ditch to reach a point across the way. Either way, all that suck that I was feeling at the time just didn't seem to matter much anymore. I had reached a low point after being so hard on myself. Throughout this course, I was constantly at the rear of everything. I wasn't a fast runner, I wasn't strong, nor did I have the study skills that I have today to pass the academic exams with scores to be proud of. I was constantly at rock bottom. The only place I had to go was up. Accepting that this failure and rejection was a real part of my life was the first step in picking myself up. So I let go of trying to stay warm and dry. I gave up on trying to graduate top of my class, and I focused on Nick Davis. Now, Nick Davis may not be the strongest, fastest, or strongest, but he was capable of putting up with more suck than anyone else in that class. At least that's what I told myself, but that was enough. That is why this is the first step in reinventing yourself. Finding out what your version of rock bottom is, will help place you in a position where you can begin to move up and forwards. There is a great story that I love to use to illustrate this foundational point further. A man walks into an old country store and sees a dog lying on the floor. As the man is gathering up his items for purchase, he can hear the dog quietly whimpering every so often. The man gathers his items and places them on the counter while the store clerk begins to ring everything up. The man looks over at the store clerk and says, "Hey, what's wrong with your dog? Why is he whimpering like that?" The clerk says to the man, "Oh, he's all right. He's just laying on a nail stuck in one of the floorboards. I guess it's bothering him or something." So the man says, "Well, if it's hurting him so much, why doesn't he just move?" The clerk looks up at the man and says, "Well, I guess it isn't hurting him bad enough for the dog to move." This is the problem you are having with your will to change who you are. Our jobs provide us with just enough to be comfortable. Our relationships with significant others or friends are good enough so we don't take the effort to try harder in them. The mindset of being content keeps us content. Don't mistake this for not being grateful. You should always be grateful for everything you have, but you should never be content. Find that rock bottom and use it to climb up out of your hole. Once you leave the hole, you can start the next step of looking back on how far you've come. Step 2, reflect on your past. It's hard to tell where you're going if you don't know where you've been. Now, I don't know who said that, so since this is my channel, I'm going to claim it as my own, and that's the end of it. I want my royalties every time someone puts that on motivational t-shirt, poster, or desktop wallpapers. Okay, so all jokes aside, this overly cliche outlook on life is a necessary evil. What we're going to do here is to choose our medium of choice, whether it's a handwritten journal or a dry erase board or even just your phone, and write down all the good and bad that has happened in your life. Now, I got it. You're going to think this step is stupid. Fully acknowledge. You're just going to skip past this and then do all the other steps. Okay, that's fine. You could do that. However, maybe you should, think this through a little bit. You're watching this video right now because everything else you've tried up until this point hasn't worked. So why would you try to skip corners now? Anyway, the reason I'm having you write this out is so that you can't BS your way out of this. Here's a bit of advice I give to junior or inexperienced leaders in the military. The problem with being a new or inexperienced leader, when you are inexperienced and you are placed in charge of people with more real-world experience than you, you can't tell if they're leading you in the right direction or not. These are hardened, experienced men and women who are there to help you to make a good decision as a leader so that they can execute your plan. But how do you know if they are giving you good advice or leading you down a path that better suits their needs instead of the needs of the Army or whatever organization or a mission or project, etc.? Pick whatever noun best suits your situation. The point is, what I always tell these young leaders is to have their subordinates put it on paper. One of the best ways to tell if someone is lying to you or not, and if they actually know what they're talking about, is to have them write it down, to put it on paper. It's pretty easy to BS someone or fake it using words or actions. It's a lot harder to put it on paper. Putting it on paper requires a deliberate action to take thoughts and words and place them into a neatly organized and digestible medium for consumption by the intended audience. That's why it's so hard to fake well enough to fool even the most junior of leaders. It makes it pretty easy to quickly identify whether what they're selling is fact or fiction. All that said, this method will also work for you because it forces you to be honest with yourself and not to lie to yourself. Now, yes, of course, you can still put a half-hearted effort into this exercise, but when it's done and you read it back to yourself, it will force you to look at your partial effort directly in the face. And then you're going to have to make a choice. You can either do nothing and remain complacent, or you can address your mediocrity head on, and then you can begin the process to correct yourself. Keep in mind that if you do what you've always done, then you'll get what you've always gotten. So now that you've gotten over yourself and went ahead and made that dang list, now we can do something with it. Again, there should be 2 categories or columns that you're working with. One for everything good that has happened and one for everything bad. Now, the purpose of this is to help you to identify the negative things within your life and how to overcome them. The purpose of generating your list in this way will help you to identify the negative things that have happened with your life and how to overcome them with the good that has happened. Here's the unfortunate reality. A negative emotion is stronger than a positive one. An amazing full 12-hour day out with friends and families can be quickly soured or overshadowed by one harmful comment on your social media. That's pretty insane when you think about it. The fact that we put so much stock in the negative aspects of our lives instead of focusing on the good that has happened. Use this list to help pair up good with the bad. Hopefully what will happen next is you can begin to understand that all those negative thoughts swirling around in your head were just simply overblown. You've created this fictitious monster in your head, and now you're equipped with the knowledge for you to be able to deal with it. Now, with all that out of the way, we can move into the action steps of the reinvention process. Step 3, choose a single goal. You know, it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that in order for us to improve ourselves, we have to first pick a direction. Now, I personally am not one of those people who gets all wrapped around the semantics of using the word goals versus dreams or any of that. The word you use doesn't matter in this case. What matters is that you pick one and only one goal to work on at a time. Now, this isn't a hard and fast rule, because in the future, when you have a little more experience, you might want to do this process again, but instead you can work on multiple goals, but no more than 3 or 5 at a time. We're going to touch on that later. That's going to be important. If this is your first go around at truly reinventing yourself, do yourself a favor and stick with one goal at the moment. I definitely subscribe to the mindset of doing one thing done great instead of a bunch of things done halfway. It is also worth noting that this goal should not be so broad as to stop you from being able to put this goal into an actionable plan. For example, a bad example for a single goal would be, I want to be more assertive at work, or even possibly, I want to make myself more likable to people. This is far too broad a topic and will be extremely difficult to put into action. If you find yourself stuck on these broad goals, then don't worry, we're going to address this. Go ahead and write it down and proceed to break it down into smaller steps as a means to reach that end goal. Now, for the sake of argument, let's just use the example of, I wish I was more assertive at work. What steps would you take in order to get there? I would break that down into more sub-steps that look more like take charge of a project or team, take on more challenging jobs or projects, or maybe even become a SME, subject matter expert in my field. These are all actions that can build you up to reaching your goal. Furthermore, by laser focusing on one thing at a time, you can achieve your goals much quicker than you initially thought, because with each step towards your goal, you are building the additional skills necessary to take on additional goals. Step 7, let's bring it all together. So we've covered a lot of information here, but let's bring it all together in a real world example, as I promised earlier. Now, 2022 marked a significant year for me. This was going to be the first year I was eligible to put in a promotion packet for 04 or major. I needed to begin the process of reinventing myself because I wanted to be ready just in case that promotion came with the additional added responsibility of taking charge of the AGR staff within my unit. What this basically meant was I wanted to be ready to be basically in a command position all over again. Now, as an engineering officer, I personally have spent most of my time from butter bar lieutenant all the way through captain in some sort of command position. But those days are long past me, and I know I'm rusty when it comes to being in charge. Knowing that I had this uphill climb ahead of me, I put into motion the steps of reinventing myself yet again. So step 1, find rock bottom and embrace the suck. Now, this isn't my first go around at reinventing myself. My version of rock bottom isn't going to be as in your face as, say, getting fired from your job. So for me, my rock bottom was the suck of having to deal with the difficulties of being in today's army. The quality of soldiers is lacking, and our force numbers are extremely low. Being forced to take a leadership role right now will be challenging, to say the least. But it is what it is, so I embrace it and accept the fact that sometimes I just have to get my hands dirty and just get the job done. Step 2, reflect on your past. Now, I have experience as a platoon leader, a company commander, and plenty of experience in the corporate world as an engineer and a project manager. There's so much data that I could pull from, so I'm not going to sit here and bore you with all that minutia. I personally think and have been told by soldiers that have served with me that I was a pretty decent company commander. And while I tend to agree with them, knowing what I know now, I would have done a lot of things differently. Furthermore, looking at my current leadership, there is a lot that I don't agree with and I would do differently. One of my most valuable assets are the lessons that I had to learn painfully from my past. I can use this to help shape the skills that I need to improve on. I will try to use this to help forge me into a better engineer officer and thus help bring my goal closer to a reality. Choose a single goal. Next step, assess your current situation. Now, I'm currently pretty good at training. Like I said, I do it every day, but in order to get good at training, I did a ton of research and spent a lot of hands-on time with it. Now, while other officers might spend a few hours or minutes on a range, I'll stay there all day and all night. Instead of sleeping in a warm bed at night, I would elect to sleep in my cot under the stars with the rest of the soldiers. Now, I chose this route of discomfort because it gives me a leg up on my competition with regards to my knowledge of training. It's easy to copy and paste from an old PowerPoint presentation and call it good to go. But to really understand the ins and outs of a training environment, you have to get engrossed with it down to the lowest level. That was my theory anyway, and honestly, it worked out pretty good. My current situation is that I'm a good researcher and I have a desire to get hands-on. I'm going to use this later when it comes time to put plans into action. Implement the 3 to 5 rule. Now, there are 2 parts of that aforementioned triangle that I want to improve on: personnel and logistics. I need to decide what 3 to 5 things, though, that I want to improve on. It It may take me a few hours or a few days to get it figured out, but once I do, I can move on to the next 3 to 5 improvements and rinse and repeat. Now, there are 2 parts of this triangle that I want to improve on: personnel and logistics. I need to decide what 3 to 5 things, personal and logistics wise, that I want to improve on. Now, it may take me a few hours or days to figure out how to get those 3 to 5 tasks done, but once I have it, I have it. I can choose another 3 to 5 things, rinse and repeat, so on and so forth until I'm good to go. On the personnel side of the house, I think I'll decide to work on the personnel side of the house. I'm going to learn more about medical readiness and evaluations. And for the logistics side, I want to learn more about property accountability, property transfers, and how to read an equipment status report or an ESR. Now, if you're unfamiliar with these 5 items, just know that within my organization, we have 5 full-time staff that focus on these daily tasks. It's pretty daunting for someone who's not trained in these fields of expertise to spend time learning about it while also staying on top of your own current workload. But regardless, those are the 3 to 5 things that I chose to work on and improve on. But regardless, those were my 3 to 5 things, and I spent a huge chunk of 2022 working on that. And on it went. The only thing left was to put it all into action. Next, we're going to execute with small actions, not decisions, daily. So, we've identified our 5 improvements, so let's now put it into action. Now, I like to keep things simple when it comes to action, especially when it comes to improvements. Instead of setting aside deliberate time to work on improving my knowledge outside of my comfort zone, I make it a point to remain flexible in the time allotted, but firm in my desire to improve. So what does this look like? Well, in practice, it means that when I need to work on something in my assigned workload, well, I stay on task. But when I find myself in a situation where I might have a question regarding personnel or logistics, I stop what I'm doing and I take time to address it. Now, for me, this could mean doing some independent research, or more commonly, I'll just walk down the hall to someone who knows more than me about it and ask. Now, this is underutilized, and I'm a huge fan of this. The act of seeking out someone who knows more than you on a particular topic is criminally underrated. Maybe it's a point of pride that keeps people from asking someone for help. Quite often when people are in positions of authority, they believe it makes them look weak to admit they don't know something or to ask for help. This is going to hurt you in the long run, and I do not recommend it. Don't be afraid to use all the resources at your disposal. That employee working at the lowest levels might be able to solve your problem, and you'll never know if you don't ask. Now, for the last step, step 8, hunt the good stuff along the way. Now, as mentioned earlier, this is a journey that has been ongoing for me all of 2022. There have been ups and there have been downs, but for the most part, I've stuck to it. I've learned from every failure along the way and found ways to turn them into positives. The ability to maintain a positive mental attitude throughout all this was difficult, but it's necessary. Do your best to identify and hone in on all the good that has happened throughout your journey. In my case, this was an extremely difficult step to accomplish because the Army is constantly changing and they keep putting more and more stress on me daily. It was getting harder and harder to remain optimistic and positive in life. The thing about my ultimate goal of reaching this promotion is that the odds are stacked against me. And it's my own fault. It's the situation that I've positioned myself in. I refuse to take part in the obvious office politics found at the higher levels of my organization. I've remained true to my foundational principles, knowing full well that this is the more difficult route to take. All that said, use the experiences that you gained during your journey of reinvention to continue to fuel you along the way. This is critical because along the way, you might find that the people you've chosen to associate yourself with will appear to change. No one wants to be reminded about their own shortcomings and failures, and by sticking to your path of reinvention, the people you once felt close to will begin to subconsciously, or in rare cases, deliberately despise you. You might hear minor comments like, well, why don't you hang out with us anymore? Or don't worry about it, just go with the flow, man. Just stop forcing it. Insecure people don't like it when people succeed. It's an unfortunate truth of life, but it exists nonetheless. The point is, you need to be ready for any potential negativity from any stumbling along the way to your goals, or the people you surround yourself with doing their best to convince you to sell yourself short. Keep your head down, push forward, stop being your own worst enemy. Focus on the positives, hunt the good stuff along the way. I assure you, they're going to be your saving grace. Guys, if you've made it all the way to the end, I want you to know how grateful I am for you electing to spend your time listening to me ramble on. If you have any topics you'd like for me to cover, please let me know down in the comments below. Y'all take it easy. God bless.